Well, this will be our last video lecture on the economics of discrimination, chapter 12, and this one's going to be on quotas. Quotas is a way of dealing with discrimination, and also solutions that might, things to think about to deal with the problems of bias and discrimination. Before we get started today, I thought I'd just let you take a little stress test, because I know these times have been rough. This was used in a case study. You're going to see two pictures of dolphins jumping out of the water. They are identical. So this study revealed that in spite of the fact that dolphins are identical, a person under stress finds differences between the two dolphins. The more differences you find between these two dolphins, the more stress you are experiencing. Ready? Okay, I had to do that. Sorry. Okay, anyway, are quotas legal? Now, what I'm about to discuss with you today is, in the United States, different countries obviously can and do have different laws. So this is a classic case, Bakke versus the Regents of the University of California. Alan Bakke was a white student who was denied admission to medical school at the University of California, Davis. Now, Davis reserved 18 spots out of 100 for blacks. The idea was blacks were underrepresented in the medical community, so they said, look, we are going to reserve spots for blacks. Well, it turned out Bakke had better credentials than some of the blacks. He sued. He said, this is discrimination. I am being judged on my race. So we have a situation where the university is trying to correct for historical discrimination by reserving spots for blacks, but somebody says, look, I was kept out because of my race, I'm not black. What did the Supreme Court rule? The Supreme Court ruled in Bakke's favor. By the way, the decision was 5-4. So what they said was inflexible quotas are illegal. You can't have quotas as a way of dealing with underrepresentation of women, of racial minorities, or other underrepresented groups. But race, as well as gender or national origin, can be used as a factor, but you just can't have strict quotas. Now, my old alma mater, the University of Michigan, was involved in cases that came before the Supreme Court a little bit later. This was around the year 2003. The school where I did my undergraduate work, literature, science, and the arts, that's where economics was at Michigan, they had a point system for admission. They admitted me anyway. But you got points for various things, your SAT scores, your grade point, your letters of reference, and also you got points if you were part of an underrepresented group. So if you were part of a racial minority, if you were Native American, there's actually a substantial Native American population in Michigan, but very few at the University of Michigan, you would get points for this. Now, the law school used race as a factor. I guess I shouldn't have race there twice, but anyway, race was used as a factor, but they didn't quantify it. They just said, okay, we want to have racial diversity, but we're not going to quantify it in terms of the points. So two related cases from the University of Michigan were judged by the Supreme Court. And what did they say? They said by 5-4, it's always amazing, how you see how important points are decided, sometimes by one vote. But the Supreme Court said you can consider race, as the law school said, look, we want diversity. And the court said that's a compelling reason. So can you use race or gender or national origin as something that you want to consider in awarding a benefit such as employment or, in this case, admission to the law school? The answer is yes. But the point system was illegal because it didn't focus on the individual. So can you just award points and say, we're going to give you so many points? The court says no. Can't do that. But can you consider it? You can consider it. You just can't quantify it. Don't ask me to explain the decisions of the Supreme Court, but this is actually how the courts wound up ruling. So what's the bottom line here? What's the thing I want you to take away? Strict quotas are illegal. It is not a legal remedy in the United States dealing with underrepresentation of some group in the labor market or other market. Not legal. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about something called the glass ceiling. Now, this is women in S&P 500 companies. Standard & Poor's looks at the 500 largest companies in terms of stock market value in the United States. And an organization called Catalyst decided to do a survey. Let's look at this. If we look at these largest companies, women make up about 45% of the employees. But if we look at the first line of managers, or people that are at the mid-level of managers, it's 37%. So women, not as many of them seem to make it to the next level. They're only 37%. Well, what about senior managers? Well, if that's the case, it's only 26.5%. What if we look at the people that are the top earners in the firm? It's about 11%. Notice that. Women are 44% of the total employees, but they're only 11% of the top earners. And what about the very top of the pyramid, the CEO? Well, only 5%. That's about 25 of the 500. In fact, it's exactly 25 of the 500 are women. So you can see the higher up you go, the fewer women there are. That's why we call it a pyramid. And by the way, we talked before about CEO compensation and the coziness of the board. Pretty good way to make money. And only about 1 in 5 board seats are occupied by women. So what we see is the higher up you go, you're going to find women a smaller and smaller share. Now, I use the term here, the glass ceiling, and this is a metaphor. It's the idea that there's a barrier. Women seem to go so high, they can see the top, but they can't crack it. It's like a ceiling made out of glass. You can see the top, you just can't get there. It's a ceiling. It's an upper limit. So, that being the case, we've talked about various types of discrimination. We've talked about, bias. We talked about the law. We talked about quotas. So what can firms do? What I would say is that there are really 3 groups of reasons why that certain groups are not performing as well in the labor market. And based on what these reasons are, the solutions will differ. Some of the reasons racial minorities don't do as well is the fact that there's certain societal reasons. In other words, society. If you're a firm and you want to hire lawyers, well, you have to choose from people that have a law degree. You have to be a member of the bar to go to trial, and you have to graduate from law school in almost every state. There might still be some exceptions, but you have to go to law school to be able to pass the bar and be admitted to the bar and practice law. If fewer minorities are able to pass the bar, the firm says, look, what can we do? There's not enough qualified applicants. We talk about trying to hire more minorities at Ohio Wesleyan, but if you look at areas such as the sciences, maybe 2% of the PhDs in sciences are awarded to black individuals. So if that's the case, they're 14% of the population, but they're 2% of the PhDs. Schools say, look, how do we find these people? So some of the reasons are beyond the firm's control. Sometimes it's the government. We talked before about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Their job is to enforce the law. The law says you can't do it, but if it turns out that the EEOC or the Attorney General's office doesn't have enough resources to do it, we won't monitor the situation and won't be enforced. So this is a case where what you might find out is the firm might not be doing the right thing, but the enforcement to get them to do the right thing isn't there. But what can the firm do? Aha. This becomes something that the firm certainly can control. So these are just some thoughts about what a firm might be able to do. One of the things is recruitment. Where do you recruit? Where do you try and find your employees? If you go to some of the areas that aren't traditional, so for example, firms, let's say Ford, General Motors, would go to historically black universities and college to recruit, they could get more minorities. So, where you recruit is going to have an effect. When I say climate here, what's the climate at the firm? Do people go around and brag and say, well, it's only Thursday and I've already worked 50 hours? Well, if that's the case, people might find it hard to have a family. So what's the climate going to be? Um, I had a colleague way back when I first taught. Actually, Justin Breidenbaugh took over for her, and she taught accounting. But before coming to Ohio Wesleyan, she worked at an accounting firm. And Joanne Harvey, there's an award named after her for accountants. She was working for one of the large accounting firms, and every year they'd have a golf outing. Well, she was a woman, so they would put her in the last foursome because they figured, well, a woman wouldn't be that good. Well, there were two problems with this. One is that she was a damn good golfer. So putting her at the end so she wouldn't hold up play was utterly ridiculous. But the real problem was by playing with clients, this is how you make contact. So if you have a climate where you discriminate against certain groups or you make people feel unwelcome, this is going to affect the employment of minorities. You have to make sure you have a climate that's welcoming to all. Where do you place people? Not all tracks lead to the top. So, for example, if you're placed in human relations or human resources, or you're put in government relations or community relations, something like that, those are great, those are important, but those generally don't lead up to the top jobs in a firm. So if we place women and racial minorities in certain jobs, those are ones that don't lead to the top. One of the most important things you're going to find out when you go into the world of work is mentoring. Somebody who's not quite your boss. They're not going to be able to hire and fire you, but a mentor, somebody that can guide you. And in fact, sometimes it is your boss. Who's going to tell you the way the world works? I always think about a mentor as something like an uncle. It's not your parent who has all the strict rules for you, but the uncle who gives you advice. Actually, in the police departments, they use the term rabbi. So in other words, your rabbi is somebody, it's not your direct supervisor, but it's somebody, a senior person who just gives you advice. Mentoring is really important. As you go out in the job market, make sure you can get some kind of mentor. It's very important. Biased rating systems. Well, we always rate people, but what you find out is sometimes the system is biased. So for example, if the rater says, I like people that are similar to me, and if the people that are doing the rating are of one gender or of one race or one other group, they're going to favor people that are similar to me. You got to be a lot more objective with your criteria than just saying, I want to hire me. Sometimes there's vague standards. Let me give you an example. Suppose you rate somebody on a scale of 1 to 5 on leadership. And we say that Joe gets a 5 and Jenny gets a 3. How do you quantify leadership? Exactly what does it mean to get a 5 or a 3? If the standards are vague, they can easily favor one group or the other. Now, my students have gone on, and just as you folks will, they've done great things. I've had a student that was a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, another one that was head of one of the largest insurance companies. One right now is a dean at Vanderbilt University. Another one is an athletic director at a Division I program. So people have risen to the top, and you folks will as well. And whatever the plan is going to be, it has to have the support of the person at the top. Culture is very important. So when you're at the top, if you say that diversity and inclusion is important and bias will not be tolerated, it's not just enough to mouth the words, but if you institute programs, give you an example. Suppose you tell people one of the things that you will be judged on is how the people under you that are minorities get promoted. If you can get them promoted, then that gets you points. Well, if you set the stage, if you have an atmosphere where you say, well, we're not going to permit racist and sexist jokes. We're going to make sure that everybody's included. We're going to have programs that make everybody feel welcome. That can have a big difference, and it really has to come from the top. And finally, it's not just enough to have diversity, to have one of each. It's not a question of having a pack of lifesavers with one of each flavor. The key is there's got to be inclusion. People have to feel like they're included and contribute. Studies have shown that where they have diversity and inclusion, better decisions are made. Okay, well, that about wraps up everything I have to say on economics and discrimination. We'll start the next chapter in the next video.